What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, or wherever you are, and whatever time it is. Welcome back to another video with me, Merchaholic. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my campaign slash faction overview series for the Divide at Impera overhaul mode for Total War Rome 2. Today we are looking at Macedon. That's right, last time we looked at the Getae, before that the Seleucids. If you can't see, I'm trying to do a mainstream faction and then a not so mainstream or well-known faction following it. So right now we're going back to Macedon, one of the most notorious factions for its early struggle in the campaign, or at least in the grand campaign, and it's probably one of the most popular factions in my opinion because of its history with Alexander the Great, of course. A lot of people love recreating his empire with the Macedonians, so that's what we're doing today, guys. Alright, so let's jump into the perks. First off, we share the same perks as all of the other Diadochi factions, which are these ones listed here. We have a minus 20% resistance to foreign occupation. Not a massive buff, but it's still decent. It'll help you out occasionally, but I don't think it'll be all that noticeable. Noticing how little or how less, I should say, some cities are going to be resisting your rule. In my opinion, 20% isn't enough to be like, oh wow, I can see a difference, but it will help you here and there. So it's not a bad perk, but it's not really a great perk either. It's decent, which I believe a lot of the faction perks are, for the most part at least. Moving on, the Successor Conflicts perk is very similar, although perhaps less useful. You have plus 10% morale for all units during battles against Hellenic factions. Now this is good and bad. Why is it good and bad? Firstly, it's good because you're going to be going to war against Hellenic factions throughout the entire campaign almost. Maybe in the very late game you won't be, but at least in the early to mid tier, you're going to be primarily fighting Hellenic factions. However, the Hellenic factions you fight are also factions that have the same perk. Egypt, Epirus, the Seleucids, and then Bactria possibly in the late game if you manage to make it that far east. They will all have the same perk. So it kind of nullifies it when you're fighting, especially Epirus in Egypt and the Seleucids. That's really going to suck, but it basically just makes it so all of your armies will be on the same level as theirs in terms of morale, not taking into account anything else, of course. The armies themselves, that's a whole other debate and a whole other section of this video. So the Diadochi perks aren't great, but they aren't bad necessarily. This one's a little bit worse for wear. However, we do see some more interesting perks as we move down to the ones specific to Macedon. Macedon is known as the barbarian subduers. They spent a lot of their history fighting Thracians, some Dacians even, and Illyrians to the northwest. And it shows here they have increased morale against barbarians. They're sick of them invading Macedon time and time again. So the morale of your men is higher than normal. How much higher? I can't say. Again, the numbers are not available to me. I kind of wish they were. Maybe they are and I'm just overlooking and I can't see it. But anyway, we have increased morale against the enemy, which is good if you're using cheap units, which you probably will be in the early game. Moving on, you have an increased industrial income. So this basically means for industrial style buildings, such as specific suburbs that have like factories in them, or textile style industries, they're going to be giving you a little bit of extra income, which is going to be very helpful because trade is going to be a big issue for you, at least in the early game. We'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, but that's actually quite a decent perk. Both of these perks, definitely not bad at all. I would even say that they're quite good perks depending on how much they increase their respective subjects. Moving on to the last one though, we have the Hellenic rivalry. This is a minor diplomatic penalty with all Hellenic factions. This doesn't really make or break your relations with any of the Hellenic factions by any means. Early on you can actually buy the friendship of quite a few of them. However, you're mainly going to be fighting Hellenic factions in the early game anyway, so at the end of the day this doesn't really affect you all that much. Who cares? You're going to be wiping these people out anyway, so they may as well hate you for it. Again, it's not really all that important, but this is kind of telling of the direction that your campaign is going to take if you want it to be successful. But anyway, we're about to jump into the campaign. Just keep in mind that all of my grand campaign reviews or faction overviews are based on the normal difficulty, which is what I recommend for you if you're new to DEI or new to a faction in general. Even if you just want to do the first 20-30 turns on normal, I recommend you do that so you at least get a chance of experiencing diplomacy with the AI before you up the difficulty and diplomacy starts to become irrelevant and almost not really functional, really, to be honest. But anyway, now we're going to jump into the campaign map, see Macedon's position. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we are on the campaign map, and as you can see, we are here looking at Pella, our one settlement that we start off with. It is our capital of Macedonia, or Macedonia, however you want to pronounce it. We have our one army in its garrison here, and that's it. That's it, campaign overview complete. Almost, actually. Now, this is going to be a fairly quick campaign overview because Macedon does not have a lot going for it. Historically, Macedon was on a very, very steep decline at this point, and although it did have a few moments of revival and perhaps glimpses of hope of empire, Rome shut that down in the end very, very efficiently. However, starting off though, things are not looking good for you. You have one settlement, one army. It's not even a good army. It has literally like one unit of each type of category. It's pretty crap, to be honest. The only unit you're going to care about keeping is this pikeman unit, maybe this cavalry unit, although you can recruit better cavalry instantly, so you may as well. But anyway, Macedon starts off in a very rough position. It is a tiny nation surrounded by other tiny nations who are, for the most part, neutral or slightly tailored towards not liking you. For example, Sparta and Athens do not like you because of your previous wars historically with them. They will often band together along with the Aetolian League, possibly even Epirus, to target you and defend themselves against Macedonian ruling of all of Greece. They're not looking for Macedonian hegemony anymore, and they're going to show it to you. Basically, this campaign can be summed up in that you're going to win or lose within the first 10 turns. Now, that might not be literal, but it almost is, in that if you cannot deal with your issues and come down and take out the Greeks very, very quickly, then you're pretty much done. This campaign is all about trying to rush and doing your rush very well, in that you're actually going to be suffering from a lack of population. So not only do you have to hit the enemy quickly, but you can't lose many troops when you do it. You start off with a population of about 35,000. Doesn't sound all that bad, and you actually have a decent spread of that population amongst the different classes. However, 35,000 is enough to maybe field 2 or 3 full stack armies, but you're going to be emptying your city as you do that, which in turn decreases the economy of it and gives you a whole host of problems if you can't recover your population quickly, which you won't be able to because all you have is Pella. You have no other settlements nearby providing you with food or growth bonuses. All you have is a crappy little fishing port here, which is barely just enough to keep your people from starving, especially once you start moving your armies out of your city. Right there, we just decreased from 3 food to 2 food instantly just by moving an army out, and that's just one army. So Macedon, while they need to move quickly against the other Greek states, you have to do so very carefully. You're basically rushing at them on your tippy toes. It sounds kind of dumb, but that's how it is. The Greek city-states will all rally against you. It's very rare that they all don't enter some form of agreement with each other. Epirus is a wild card. Sometimes they're busy taking on Rome. Often, though, they'll come back to Epirus and consolidate their position and then work on taking out the Illyrians and other Greek states. But for the most part, you're almost guaranteed to be fighting Sparta and Athens. And since the Aetolian League is right here, you may as well attack them yourself as well and make them go up against you. Not only that, but you also have quote-unquote barbarian neighbors above you. I don't really like using the term barbarian. It kind of seems like these factions aren't somewhat civilized, or they don't have their own culture. They do, they were considered barbarians at the time by at least the Greeks and the Macedonians in particular. Anyway, the point is that you have a lot of neighbors to your north that are not of the same culture as you. You actually have quite a mixture of cultures around you. You have some Illyrians here to the northwest. You have some Celts here to your direct northeast. And then up here to your direct north, you have Daco-Thracians, and then you have more Daco-Thracians to your east as well. The majority of these factions will not like you because of their cultural difference. However, you actually can usually buy their non-aggression, perhaps even an alliance if you give them enough money. However, that brings me to another difficult point of the campaign, and that is that your economy is in shambles. You have one city, your city does not give off any resources whatsoever, and you have no trade at the beginning of the game. And while you have a lot of potential for trade in that there's a lot of people who you could have an agreement with since you have a coastal city, a lot of these factions are going to be pissed off with you very quickly for fighting the other Greek city-states, and the other ones aren't really going to be in a rush to trade with you because you don't have all that much to offer. You don't have any resources in Pella. You basically have nothing and nothing to offer to these other factions who are going to be willing to trade. However, that does change in the kind of mid to early game once you deal with all of Greece, because nearly all of the Greek cities have their own resources. For example, Sparta has marble, Apollonia over here in Epirus has wine, Larissa has olives, up here there's bronze, up here there's silver, and then there's even more as you begin to expand out, even some more marble down there. All of those are very good resources that the other nations around you will want to trade you for. However, you gotta earn it first. So that's basically the majority of this campaign in a nutshell. You're gonna have to rush, but rush gently on your tippy toes, as I said. I know it sounds completely stupid, but that's what makes Macedon so hard. If you total up, or if you try to give the enemy nations around you time to build, you're really just setting yourself up to fail. I don't really see a way that you can win the campaign if you do not rush in the early game. I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure there'll be expert DI players who'll be like, dude, what are you talking about? That's bullshit. But for the majority of players, I feel like Macedon is quite a hard faction, and unless you try to rush at least some of the enemies around you, or some of the nations around you, then you're gonna really, really struggle. It's a very hard campaign if you don't struggle. I mean, if you don't rush, I should say. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that is the campaign overview summed up. You start off with Pella, buy friendships around you to your north. Don't even bother buying friendships with the Greeks early on. Just focus on rushing them and taking them out. And once you do that, good luck with your campaign. You should have a fairly decent campaign after that. But if you can't make some very strong and bold moves within your first 10 turns, you're done. That's just how it is as Macedon. Anyway, we're now going to jump on to part 2 of the video, where we're going to look at the military of the Macedonians. Let's do it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we are for part 2 of our campaign overview for Macedonia. Now we are looking at the military and the specific units of the army of Macedon. First off, I want to give a shout out to Henry Patogi. Hopefully I'm saying that last name right, buddy. He gave me the suggestion of doing these unit and military reviews on a battle map so you guys can actually see the units I'm talking about. So I'll be doing that, and then I will also be giving you guys my part 3 verdict while we are doing a small little battle with these units. I won't give you too much. I won't do too much of the micromanaging in the army. I'll just kind of put them on the battlefield, make them charge at the enemy while I give you guys my verdict. But yeah, that's what we're doing. We're changing things up a little bit, so hopefully you guys enjoy this new way of looking at the troops of the armies. Anyway, to get us started, we are looking at the general's unit for the Macedonians, which is of course the Sacred Squadron. Now this is the first version of the Sacred Squadron. There is a second one. It's a little bit better, basically in almost every way. It's basically a shock cavalry unit, in case you couldn't tell by looking at the very long, basically pikes that they have in their hand, or lances, I should say. Very good general to start off. Is way more useful than some of the other factions, such as the Celts and of a barbarian factions that usually just use infantry. This will help you win a lot of the early game battles, especially when you're trying to rush and you don't have time to buy yourself your own good shock cavalry. So they are an excellent shock unit. They have a charge bonus of 37 though, which is kind of disappointing considering they have these massive lances. They do have the attack to support that lance though, so that's helpful. But yeah, the charge bonus is kind of a little weak considering they're supposed to be quite an elite unit. But it's not too bad at all. You're still going to get some kills when you're charging the enemy. But do make sure that your unit does not rout, or get tired I should say actually. But anyway, we're now going to move across the army, and we're going to be looking at the army based on the different types of units there are. You can see I've split up the army into a bunch of different categories. In addition, I'm also trying to focus on only the armies themselves that are true to that nation. For example, I'm not including mercenary or area of recruitment units, although I will mention them to you so you can still take notes about that. But yeah, I'm going to be trying to avoid showing you the AOR units, since most of those AOR units are circumstantial. They won't be available to you from every province because they're AOR units. And they're also available to other factions for the most part, so keep that in mind. Anyway, we're now moving on to, as that bloke just yelled out, Peltas, or the skirmishers of Macedonia. It's a little disappointing for the most part. You basically have some, all of the basics covered. You have some slingers, you have some light pelters here, you have some archers. These are basically all just peasant units, for lack of a better word. They don't have any armor whatsoever. Their missile damage is decent at 15, especially for an archer, it's okay. They're very cheap, very expendable units that you'll be using to support your better units on the battlefield. However, they do have very good Peltas units. Now this is basically a skirmishing unit that the Greeks specialized in, especially once they have their Furios reforms. In addition to that though, they actually are decent at melee. They have okay armor rating at 25. Their melee attack is 9, melee defense is 12. So these are actually a pretty good flanking force. They're not going to do amazing on the charge, but they'll basically act like a supporting swordsman unit. Not as good as a designated swordsman unit, but still quite useful. And they also have a fair bit of ammunition to help you keep going. And in fact says 6. So they'll have 6 javelins before they engage in melee combat. So these will help out your armies quite a lot, especially when you go up against someone like Epirus who has elephants. Just keep that in mind. One thing worth mentioning about the skirmishing division of Macedon though is that they do have access to Cretan archers and Rhodian slingers once you take over settlements within those respective provinces. So make sure you use those AOR units, but like I said, I'm not going to be showcasing AOR units because reasons. Anyway, moving on down the battlefield, we are now looking at the bread and butter of any Greek faction really, which is the spearmen, or in this case the pikes. The very glorious pikes. They are insanely long. Macedon was the originator of the Sarissa pike, and you can see why. Holy far out, that is a very, very long pike, mate. You overcompensating or something, Sonny Jim. But anyway, these units look fantastic, and they also have pretty good variety for the most part with their spears. They have a bunch of different types of spearmen. They have, for example, these Furios spears here. They will come to you after the Furios reforms happen. They are a mobile spear unit that actually has a javelin with them as well, but these will be mainly used to support your cavalry units, or your units that are more exposed on the flanks and they need something to deal with enemy cavalry. Furio spears will be very helpful for you for the mid to late game part of your campaign, so use them as much as you can. We also have some hoplites here. However, I really wouldn't bother using hoplites too much when you're playing as Macedon because you have pikes. I just don't really see the need for them. This is a heavier unit of the Furio spear. This is basically what they call thorax spearmen. They also specialize in dealing with enemy cavalry. but they also have a fairly solid melee defense, so they'll actually help in holding up the line for you if you so want them to. But down the line here a little bit more, we have some hoplite units here, a couple of different types of hoplite units. We have some insanely heavy hoplite units right here, very incredible unit. If you're using hoplite armies, this is basically going to be your version of Triarii that the Romans use. They are the shield bearers unit. They are excellent, probably the best hoplite unit in the game. Well, not the best, but they're fairly close. The only thing letting them down is their attack. It's at 9, but I mean they're doing excellent in all the other departments. For a hoplite unit, they have a 41 armor, which is fantastic. I believe none of the Spartan units get into the 40s with their armor, so even though a Spartan unit will be more skilled than this, these units will outlast them and probably end up wiping them out. You do have some lighter spears over here. For example, Macedonian light hoplites. There's also another lighter hoplite unit that you can bring to the battle. I didn't bring it with me since we already have this one type of light hoplite, but there are levy hoplites that you can bring if you so wish. And then you also have just generic medium tier Macedonian hoplites. If you want hoplite armies, these are the guys that are going to be filling your main battle line. But anyway, moving on down, we have the heavier pikemen here. You can see though, especially if I get rid of the UI, some of your pikemen have a longer pike than the others. So do keep that in mind. It does make a fairly significant difference. For example, if this pikeman unit were to go up against either of these, it would win. Almost based solely off that. And this is your bronze shield pikes. They are basically your medium tier pikeman unit that are going to be filling up the main battle lines of your armies. As will this Thorax bronze shield pikeman over here. So anyway, pikes for days. That is the Macedonian way. I wouldn't bother with the hoplites. I just don't see them being useful whatsoever when you have so many different types of pikes at your disposal, and you have the best pikemen in the game. I know the silver shield pikemen for the Seleucids get a lot of rep. However, statistically speaking, the
shield bearers.
Which unit is it exactly? It's not the shield bearers. It might be the elite guard here. I believe the elite guard has equal, if not better, statistics than the silver shields. However, their pikes are not as long as these other cheaper pikeman units, so do keep that in mind. But basically, Macedon probably has the best pikes in the game. If not, they are super close in contention for it.
Swordsman.
However, something they do not have anywhere near close to be the best in the game is swordsmen. And here in the swordsman category, I've actually given them an exception in showing an AOR unit, which is the Thracian
warriors.
What would this be? I can't remember the exact name, but anyway, the game refers to them as Thracian warriors. These are your shock infantry, and they are the only shock infantry you get. The Macedonians really struggle in the sword department and in the shock department in particular, so you're going to be relying on AOR units like this Thracian unit here to back you up, although I believe you might be able to recruit this unit almost anywhere if you have the high enough level military building for it. Don't quote me on that, double check, but either way you'll be relying on Thracians quite a bit since they surround your initial starting position. Here are your Thorax swordsmen. Once you get the Thorax and Thurios reforms, they will be the basically bread and butter swordsmen that you'll be using if you want swords based armies. However, a swordsman unit going up against, say, a pike unit, in my opinion, is going to lose almost every day of the week, so I would be hesitant to use sword armies. I'm finding that out now the hard way in my Spartan campaign. In case you haven't seen it, go check it out. I'm struggling in reforming my army. But anyway, another AOR unit that almost all of the Diadochi factions rely on are the
Galatian Royal Guard.
Fairly elite tier unit. They have very good armor for the type of unit that they are. 41 armor in particular. This is basically a Galatian personal bodyguard for a general, although you can't recruit them as a bodyguard, which is a shame. But they are excellent swordsmen, but they're not going to be all that available to you since they are an elite unit. They'll be at the back of your army, ready to come in and fill up emergency locations in your battle lines. Then you have some very basic Greek levy infantry with swords.
Royal
And then,
Peltas.
however, you have the Royal Peltas. They have ammunition of 2, so they'll throw in 2 javelins before they run out of ammunition. Their shields are very small, so they're going to be susceptible to skirmisher fire. But they do have decent armor, and they're just a very excellent unit. Their attack is 16. That is incredibly high for a swordsman unit. It's very, very good. Their armor is only at 28. It's not excellent considering they are a very elite unit. But, I mean, their skill is just incredible. The only thing really slowing them down is a charge bonus of 18, which is pretty pathetic. And a weapon damage 24, which is fine, but it has almost no armor penetration at 4. So, it's going to be a very elite swordsman unit, but to be honest, I'd rather get me some Galatians with their better charge bonus at 21, and they still have a very high melee attack of 15, and they have way better defense as well at 12 instead of 8. So keep that in mind anyway. The Macedonians kind of struggle in the swords department, in particular with shock cavalry. In their eyes, swordsman units are basically just units to help support your main battle line full of pikes. Okay, and now we move on to the cavalry of the Macedonians, or should I say the secret weapon of the Macedonians. Now, the Macedonians are different to all of the other Diadochi in that they actually don't get access to elephants unless it is through mercenary recruitment. However, the other factions such as the Seleucids and the Egyptians get access to them very quickly. In fact, they get them at the start of the campaign. Even Epirus has access to mercenary elephants early on, so they're going to show you up if you let them. However, your cavalry is some of the best in the world. Although not the best, it is some of the best. And one of the reasons it's the best is because it's quite cheap and effective. These Thessalian cavalry, they'll win you the early game in regards to your campaign. They're quite a cheap unit. They are readily available to you. They have excellent a charge bonus at 49. That is incredibly high for any kind of cavalry unit. Even cataphract units of, say, the Seleucids only have a few extra points over them. And this is a fairly cheap shock unit, and it's only medium tier. If you let them go up against other cavalry, though, they'll get annihilated. If they get stuck in a melee with spearmen, they'll get annihilated. But if you're charging enemy in the rear like you should be with cavalry, they're going to do fantastic. They will wing you battles in 1 or 2 charges. They are very, very useful, very incredible, and the only thing that they are surpassed by
Sarissa cavalry
is the Sarissa Lancers or Sarissa Shock Cavalry, which are also available to you from the beginning of the campaign. They're even lighter in armor though, so they're going to really struggle against skirmisher fire. In addition, their melee defense is almost non-existent. Melee attack is good, but it's only because they have the large lance for the charge. Get them in, get them out like you should with any kind of cavalry unit for the most part. And again, they could win the early campaign for you alone as long as you use them correctly. And they're quite a cheap unit. They are just very lightly armored though, so keep that in mind. However, we're also mixing up all of the different types of cavalry here.
Tarentine cavalry.
So here you can see we have some Furios cavalry, or Tarentines. They're going to be very useful for you in that they still have a decent charge bonus of 36, which is nothing to scoff at for a skirmisher unit. It's basically the same as your general's unit, which is funny because he's a shock cavalry unit, but anyway. You'll be relying on these units quite a bit when you cannot afford your shock cavalry units, which won't be all that often anyway, since the Sarissas are fairly cheap for the most part. And moving on to the other skirmisher cavalry, you have some proper Tarentine cavalry down here. They're basically just slightly better than these other Furios cavalry, who are also calling themselves Tarentines. They're basically a slight upgrade. This will be your basic skirmisher cavalry unit for the mid game, maybe the early game if you manage to get enough money. But you may as well spend the money on a cheaper unit while you're getting additional shock units to support them. So You do have some pretty good shock cavalry. You also have a lot of variety. Here's another light shock cavalry unit that you can get. Very lightly armored though. Not very good in melee whatsoever. They only have a melee attack of 11, which is not that great for a cavalry unit. The defense is 10 though, so they will harass the enemy, and they will actually survive for a little while if they get into a melee with another cavalry unit. So they are fairly versatile cavalry, but they're not that great at anything. They can do a little bit of everything to help you out across the battlefield. Charge bonus of 36, so it's still okay to charge into the rear of enemies. But they don't have any armor really. Armor of 18. They're gonna die to basic slingers, so be very, very careful with them.
Citizen cavalry!
Up here though, we get into the bread and butter of the melee side of Macedonian cavalry. This is Macedonian citizen cavalry. Decently armored, but not all that great. They have a decent shield. They have a spear, I should say, for melee fighting, so they only have a melee attack of 8. They do have a bonus against cavalry of 2, but I mean, that's not really an amazing bonus by any stretch. They're just basically the Roman equites for Macedonia. So they're going to play a support role for your other cavalry that are a little bit more specialized, such as your Sarissas and your Thessalian cavalry. They will help them out, help keep the enemy cavalry off their backs. In the meantime, though, we have some very, very cheap javelin cavalry down here. I almost wouldn't even bother recruiting them. You can if you're desperate for cav and you are very low on money. But they're just very terrible, and the morale is terrible. 33. These guys are going to rout pretty early on if they get engaged by enemy cavalry. Don't rely on them for anything. Even their rear charges against enemy soldiers aren't really going to do all that much. What is, however, going to do a lot
cavalry
is this Sacred Squadron here. They have a charge bonus of 49, which is funny because your general is the same unit. Hang on, where is he? Let me track him down. Yeah, your general is the same, Sacred Squadron as well, but he only has a charge bonus of 37. So I'm guessing the devs did that to make sure your general wasn't too OP, which is fair enough. Generals are pretty OP early on.
Heavy cavalry, ready and willing.
If you want to recruit these units outside of your general's bodyguard unit, though, feel free. I don't think it's worth it though. They are very expensive. They have decent armor, but not all that great at 38. I mean, it's okay, but they're still going to die to skirmisher cavalry. Like this unit here could do a lot of charging, but it's going to take casualties against a unit that is super poor, like this one right here. So, in my opinion, save your money, spend it on getting more Sarissa cavalry or something like that. The only reason you'd really want more expensive and veteranized cavalry, or shock cavalry in particular, is when you're going up against the major players of the Diadochi, such as the Seleucids, who will be bringing their best against you, and you'll need to outclass them as much as you can.
Yours to command.
Over here, though, we have the Royal Squadron. That is a skirmisher unit. This is actually a really good unit. It's fairly versatile. A charge bonus of 38, which isn't excellent, but it's still going to be enough to do some good damage on rear charges. Melee attack of 12 and defense of 12, armor of 38. This is going to be your all-around good cavalry unit. It doesn't specialize in anything in particular, even though it is a skirmisher unit. It's basically going to do a little bit of everything you need for a fairly hefty price, though. You have cheaper units that are more specialized in their role. I don't know if you could justify buying this unless you just have extra money and want to. I mean, they are very diverse in their roles, so perhaps if you're marching into territory and you don't know how the enemy armies are going to be comprised, then it might be fair enough to have one or two of these units to help support the rest of yours, but I don't know. I'm a big believer in trying to use cheaper cavalry. It's all about cost effectiveness, right? This unit here will annihilate a unit on the charge, and it's going to be like half the price of this Royal Squadron over here. So it's not a bad unit by any means, but it's the kind of unit you buy, just like this one, when you're trying to outclass the enemy, because you know they're going to have really quality units coming up against you, again, such as the Seleucids, maybe the Egyptians. although they use a lot of their AOR units. But yeah, that's the review of the Macedonian army. You can tell that they are lacking in the shock cavalry department and in the swordsman department. Despite them having a lot of numbers here, don't let it fool you, their swordsmen are not very good, especially when compared to sword specialized nations such as the Celts and the Romans. In addition, don't let this fool you, even though we only have a few skirmish units here, they have access to very, very good AOR skirmish units in their early game. You only have to take like one settlement, maybe two. And they're available to you in the form of Cretan archers and Rhodian slingers. So, despite them lacking in the skirmisher department, it doesn't last long in the grand campaign. However, anyway, we're now going to move on to part 3 of our verdict for Macedon. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, before we jump into part 3 of our verdict, I almost forgot to do the navy of the Macedonians, and it is actually worth doing. The Macedonians actually have a navy, unlike some of our previous factions such as the Getae, who are almost non-existent. The Macedonians are actually going to be using their navy quite a bit as well. You can see you have quite a few different choices for your admirals up here. You can basically get any type of ship, or at least any category of general. You have two you have two melee style troops which have a lot of health, 2,000 ship health down here on the right hand side. That's really insane. That must be quite a large ship. It says it's just 45 meters, which is still large, but whew, that is heavy HP. And then the others, you have a Scorpion, and then down here you actually have some more melee troops. So you don't have a skirmishing personal admiral ship, I should say, per se, but you do have some very good melee ships, and then you have a Scorpion here, which I believe might also have skirmishers on there. Does it say here? These Greek archers, yeah. So you can use a smaller Scorpion combined with some archers, so you do have a skirmishing element to your admiral if you want it. But anyway, the main thing that the Macedonian fleet focuses on is their melee capabilities. They do have some archer ships that can support you, although the highest they go in number is 75. That's kind of disappointing. They do have an artillery ship, so that does help, but across the board, they just have a lot of variety in their melee ships, and this is not taking into account any AOR units or any mercenary naval ships as well. So you can see the point of the Macedonian fleet. Getting close to your enemy, whether you're going to be ramming them or boarding them, it's up to you. For the most part, it kind of depends on who you're going up against. If you're going up against, say, Egypt, who focus a lot more on missile ships, although do have a lot of melee options. But the Egyptians will be one of your biggest enemies in the mid-game playing as Macedon. And so if you're encountering the heavy skirmisher-reliant ships, or fleets I should say, your melee troops are going to do very well in just boarding them. Even if you only have like a 60-man crew, they'll still be able to take on a 100-man, if not 75-man ship from the Egyptians if it just has archers on it. It might take them a little bit longer, but they should still be able to carve through them. And so, yeah, the Macedonian Navy, I would say, is above average. It is lacking a little in the skirmishing department, but, I mean, it's naval warfare in Rome, too. You don't need a lot of variety to do well. You just need to micromanage as quickly as you can, to be honest. And that's what will win you a battle. Anyway, now let's on to part 3 for our final verdict. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the part 3 verdict for the Macedonian faction overview for DEI. We're out here in the middle of nowhere doing a battle. We have the Macedonians marching against the Roman legion that is hiding out in the hills. And the reason I chose this map instead of doing a flat flat Greenlands map, I should say, is that this is actually a battle map that is inside of Macedon. And it highlights one of the biggest issues that the Macedonians will face, which is terrain. You're going to be relying on trying to fight on flat open ground, so these guys, your pikemen, can be the most cost efficient that they can. You're really going to be relying on hammer and anvil tactics to win the day for you in battles, especially once you go up against other Diadochi factions that are also using pikemen. The pikemen might outclass yours if you don't have the elite pikemen. In addition, you'll be trying to rely on your shock cavalry to get as many kills for you as possible. Let's just send these units forward to rush. I'm not really caring what happens in this battle. I'm just trying to give you guys a little bit of eye candy while I do the fighting. While I do the talking. So anyway, that's why I wanted to choose this battle map. I'm going to choose battle maps that are specific to each faction and highlight some of their issues and some of their benefits. But yeah, Macedon is going to be a very interesting faction. It all depends on your early game and how you play. If you want to have an easier time, rush your enemies very quickly. Like I said, within the first 10 turns, you should have most of Greece, if not at least half of Greece, under your control. If you don't, good luck, man. This is going to be a rough campaign for you. My second point, Rome is going to be your either biggest ally or biggest enemy early on. You can buy their friendship, however, if they get a foothold in Epirus, which they often do, you're going to have some real big issues in trying to make sure that they stay friendly with you. So I would be careful with that. It probably means that you're going to have to rush Epirus as well as Greece and Sparta and all these other factions. Just do keep that in mind. Wow, I'm just really enjoying these visuals here, the dust and stuff being kicked up. We are charging into a Roman legion. Nothing too fancy, just some Roman legionnaires combined with some of their archers and some of their more veteranized legion troops. But like I said, Rome could be your biggest ally or your biggest enemy. Kind of depends on how well you play the diplomacy side of things. But anyway, moving forward to my next point, this campaign will primarily be what I would call a total war campaign, in that you're going to be attacking almost everybody around you, and the people who you won't be attacking, you'll be buying off their friendship, and buying a friendship or an alliance is never really all that reliable. It can be if you really, really work on it. Like, for example, if you spend a lot of money trying to make them like you, go to war with their enemies, you give them favorable relations and so on and so forth, then it could maybe work out. But for the most part, you're going to be on your own throughout this campaign, and it's going to become very lonely very early on. So this is going to be a very Total War style campaign early on. Moving on to that though, trade will be rough throughout the campaign. Perhaps in the mid to late campaign it'll ease up a little bit, but by the time you've conquered Greece and your surrounding enemies, you would have pissed off all of their cousins as well, as in people who are also part of the same faction. So that's going to be a real big issue for you. You're going to have to really basically work to make trade more viable for yourself. It can be okay, but you're really going to have to work at it. Depends on how much effort you put into it. Then my final point before we get to the difficulty level, avoid sieges as much as you can. You don't have the shock infantry that are going to take the walls for you. Focus on hammer and anvil tactics against your enemies, and then if you can do that, you'll win a lot of battles. However, the other Diadochi factions will be relying on the same thing as well. For example, the Seleucids will be using their elephants against you, which you won't have access to, so keep that in mind. But for the most part, this is a very difficult faction, and I'm actually going to rate it at a 7 out of 10 as hard. I'm going to rate it as an 8 out of 10 though, at very hard, if you do not rush your Greek neighbors nearby. If you don't rush them, just good luck, honestly. I don't really see how you could win if you don't rush. I see nothing but problems if you play like that, which is fine though. The good challenge is always fun, but yeah, I just don't see how it could come out well if you don't rush in your campaign. You have to get really lucky basically and hope that all the Greek states end up fighting each other somehow, but I'm not too sure how they would do that, if they ever would at all. But anyway, that's it. 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 if you don't rush, which an 8 out of 10 makes it a very hard faction. Easily and probably the top 5 most difficult factions. However, they also have a very decent roster, which is what is keeping it from being a 9 out of 10, in my opinion. Best pikes in the game, excellent shot cavalry, although not the best in the game by a long shot. But perhaps maybe the most cost effective. I'm not too sure. I'm just giving some random attack orders here while we do our thing. But anyway, that's about it for Macedon, ladies and gentlemen. I really hope you all enjoyed. Hopefully you guys enjoy this new style of showing off the military units so you guys can see them, and maybe it will help you have a little bit more of a visual representation of the armies and what they will look like. I'll be trying to do this for all of the factions moving forward. Some of the factions might be a bit of an issue, such as Rome, who have so many units on their roster. However, I'm just going to avoid using AOR units, so that will cut out a lot of their units and allow me to give you guys an in-depth look at the enemy at the very least. So that would be very good. But yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this. I really appreciate all your support and feedback on the other campaign faction overviews for DEI. Keep them coming, keep your suggestions coming. I'll have some more factions coming as the weeks come by. But anyway, in the meantime, thank you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.